Hello, and welcome back once again to the Sage's Library. I'm, as always, your humble sage, Trevor Duval. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and if you do want to help support the channel, please do hit like and subscribe, or if you want to become a member of the YouTube channel, or a member of the Patreon to help support the show and all of the various videos that I do on the channel, the links for all of that are below. Now, normally on this show, I talk about games that I've played for years, but this is a very recent addition to the Sage's Library, Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, the Sage's Library is not exactly a review show. It's more of a discussion of my particular experiences with a given game. So this is not a deep dive on Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's merely a discussion of my experiences with it thus far. So I picked up this game only about 6 months ago, so my experience with it is still fairly limited, so, take it with a grain of salt and all that. I've always had a fascination with Pathfinder, mostly because I both love what it can do while at the same time being somewhat frustrated by what I see as some limiting factors. And with all of the drama surrounding Wizards of the Coast recently, with so many people ditching 5e for Pathfinder, I thought I'd give my 2 cents on the game. Now, a caveat before we begin. Full disclosure, I am not the biggest fan of class and level-based games, so understand that my assessment here, it'll be definitely reflecting that bias, so just keep that in mind as we go forward. I may sound overly critical of this game at times, but I always try to look for what excites me about a game, and there's a lot that excites me about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So I ran D&D 3.5 for a long time back in the aughts, and Pathfinder descends directly from that ancestor, D&D 3.0 itself, which was a big departure from 2nd Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And then they came out with 3.5, which was a series of slight changes that improved the game, streamlined the game, streamlined various things. And then, of course, there was Pathfinder 1, which was a response to Wizards of the Coast abandoning 3.5 and going to D&D 4th Edition. So Pathfinder 1 was very much kind of like a slightly improved clone of 3.5. And then, of course, there's Pathfinder 2. So this is a direct descendant of D&D 3.5. So its DNA is very, very strong. But like all products of evolution, it has eventually settled into its own kind of thing. This is a game that definitely favors rules over rulings, which isn't a knock against it or anything. It's just a playstyle. So what does that mean? Well, basically it means that the philosophy of the game is everything is forbidden unless explicitly allowed by the rules. Now, that may sound harsh, but really all it means is that the designers have gone out of their way to create a set of rules that try to cover virtually every conceivable scenario a character might find themselves in. Basically to try and make it easier on the GM to adjudicate any given situation. This philosophy is the opposite of a lot of OSR style or rules light style of gameplay, where it's contingent upon the GM to make rulings in situations where the rules aren't necessarily clear or sometimes even totally non-existent. And as we'll see in a minute, Pathfinder's rules over rulings philosophy is especially attractive to GMs who are coming over from D&D 5th Edition. Also, I should say right off the bat that if you are the kind of player that's more sort of narrative in focus, you're more about the group storytelling than you are about detailed combat mechanics, well, there's probably more suitable games for you out there other than Pathfinder 2. But as a lover of all RPGs and all different playstyles, let me tell you what I do like about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, in my admittedly limited experience with this particular incarnation of what is essentially just another version of D&D, I think this is absolutely great as a dungeon crawler. Going into old ruins, exploring the rooms, fighting the monsters, and looting their treasure has never felt more well supported. Also, there is the 3-action economy. Now, this is a thing that a lot of people talk about, and for a reason. It doesn't matter who you are, every PC can do 3 things in a round. Although some of those things can actually take up 2 actions, like casting a spell or something. But everybody gets 3 basic actions. Now, this is actually a pretty big deal. This can change the nature of a combat round pretty significantly. So in most games out there, you have a round structure where actions are divided up into largely 2 different types, minor versus major or slow versus fast, whatever the particular nomenclature of the game is. But basically what it means is a character in a round can do one kind of thing, and then he can do another kind of thing. So like a minor action might be movement, whereas a major action might be an attack, right? So everybody gets that. You can move and you can attack, or you can do a double move, let's say. But In Pathfinder, everybody gets 3 actions, and those actions can be whatever the player wants. You can do 3 moves if you want. You can move and, draw a weapon and attack. You could attack 3 times if you want, although there is something called a multi-attack penalty, so it's not really in your interest to attack 3 times, but you can do it. There's all different kinds of things you can do to utilize those 3 actions. It's entirely up to you. And that really does change the nature of the combat round, because it gives players, no matter what their class or race or whatever is, it gives them a lot more options, which is good. I mean, more options is always good. And in conjunction with the lack of a typical attack of opportunity rule, that's in this game reserved mostly for like fighter types. This speaks to one of my personal pet peeves about these kinds of games, which is retreating, or rather the lack of the ability to retreat. You see, with 3 actions and limited attacks of opportunity, you can safely maneuver around the battlefield or withdraw to reform your positions without the fear of just being cut down by the enemy as soon as you try something other than attack. So this creates a much more mobile battlefield combat, which of course keeps things far more interesting as you get to use the terrain and battlefield conditions to your advantage. And so combat feels that much more tactical in play. That's really good fun if that is in fact your focus. It's not for everybody, but if that is your focus, this game really handles it really, really well. One of the other things that people who like the game say they like most about it is that the GM does not have to house rule very much. The rules are very robust, as I alluded to before. One of the common criticisms of D&D 5th edition is that there isn't a lot of GM, or I guess DM in their case. There's not a lot of support for the GM, that a GM very often has to invent a house rule on the fly because there isn't a specific rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide to address it. But in Pathfinder, that is not a concern. There is a rule for everything, and I do mean everything. In fact, that is exactly what keeps me from being able to fall totally in love with Pathfinder 2e. It's very, very carefully designed to be perfectly balanced. But I'm not a big game balance guy. I think as a concept, game balance is highly overrated, and maybe I'll do a separate video on just that alone. Game balance is great for beginning GMs, or even for maybe experienced GMs who are beginning to GM Pathfinder, because it's important to understand what the designer's intent is before you can go messing with the rules. So balance helps with that, but I find that overall, the idea of game balance in Pathfinder kind of forces the players down a certain road to think in a certain way. It can sometimes feel to me like the game is carefully constructed to prevent players from thinking too much outside the box that Pathfinder gives them. This is the way to play this game. Here are the rules. You see, it's a class and level-based game, just like D&D, which means that everyone has a defined role, which is what is often called niche protection. So in the best case scenario, this prevents 2 different characters from having abilities that wind up stepping on each other. Which also means that if I want to try something that my character class and or level doesn't specifically allow, I'm basically out of luck. There's a special rule or feat for everything, just like there was in D&D 3.5. If you want to try and influence a group of orcs you encounter not to immediately attack you, well, you better have the group impression skill feat, or else you can only influence one of them. No ifs, ands, or buts. You want to walk and chew gum? Well, sorry, you have to be a 5th level druid with the Bubblicious feat before you could do that. Now, obviously, a good GM will be able to interpret each situation on its own merits and handle it differently, regardless of what the book might say. So, for example, my current GM that's running the game that I'm playing in might handle that particular situation by saying, well, there is a specific feat for that doesn't come till, 2 levels later, but I'll let you try it anyway, just at a higher difficulty number. But that philosophy is the rulings over rules style of GMing, which this game, by default, tends to discourage. There's a reason why there's a rule for everything. They want you to play this game in a very specific way. But that's not inherently a bad thing. Pathfinder is a game that tries to give GMs a set of detailed and specific rules in order to adjudicate any possible situation, which is great for new GMs just learning the ropes. But it can be a bit frustrating for more experienced GMs and even more experienced players who like to wing it once in a while based on what makes sense in that particular moment, in that particular context. In certain circumstances, my experience has been that it can feel a bit like you're being limited by the game's rules. Now, yes, of course, as a GM, you can choose to ignore any rule you want. I mean, hey, it's your game after all. But at that point, you kind of got to ask yourself, why am I playing this particular game if I'm just going to ignore its rules? Now, one of the upsides of having this design is highly variable character creation. You're not going to find a lot of level 1 Pathfinder 2e fighters that look exactly the same, for example. And that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. I love the character building process in this game. It's really fun to dive into the different background and class feats and options to make something that feels really unique and interesting. A lot of people look at this and go, oh my God, there's so many choices. There are a lot of choices, but it is tailored in such a way as to guide you to a point where you're not overwhelmed. At least I think so. I find it a lot of fun. And in terms of everything else that makes a character, it's a lot like D&D. You've got your typical fantasy races and classes. The spells are all basically the same. The monsters are all mostly familiar. But the difference with 5e and this is that the math in this game is a lot tighter, and it just works most of the time. If you follow the formula for encounter creation, something that is sorely lacking in 5e, there's very little chance that you'll wipe out your party. Now, I will say that despite the balance of the game, which, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a huge proponent of. I prefer games that don't rely on classes and levels. But hey, that's just me. It's just one man's opinion. But despite that, Pathfinder is still a very challenging game. A lot of people call 5e D&D on easy mode. Well, that is definitely not the case here. It may look similar to 5e on the surface, but Pathfinder 2nd Edition feels a lot scarier in my experience than anything that I ever did in D&D 5e. And that's a good thing. I like challenges. I like consequences to my character's actions. I even like a reasonable amount of resource management. Although Pathfinder still does smack of the old have a couple of encounters and then rest for a day to get all healed up and get your spells back, which is a bit of a slog that honestly pushed me away from D&D style games back in the 80s. But that said, I like good tactical fights, and this game really does excel at that kind of thing. Now, the book itself, I'm more of a book guy, not a PDF guy, and so this is great. It's sturdy. I love the heft of a good old-fashioned tome that's chock full of useful information. I'm not particularly crazy about the artwork inside. For me, it's a bit cartoonish, which is odd considering that I do cartoon voices for a living. But again, that's just my opinion. Art is super subjective, and it's not bad or anything. It's not amateur. It's just the style is not my particular style. And despite my favoring of rulings over rules style of GMing, I really do appreciate the thought and care that's gone into the design of this system. I certainly feel like whatever my PC is actually allowed to do, he can do it with the knowledge that the math is going to work. Also, this is a big one, there's really no such thing as a useless character here. Unlike its predecessor, D&D 3.5, there are no character build traps hiding in the book to render your PC suboptimal, at least not that I've found. Any character you choose is going to be well integrated into the whole system of the larger game. The organization of the book kind of bugs me a little bit. It seems like skills and the various things you can try with them are kind of scattered across several chapters, but it has got probably the best index I've ever seen. It's got not only the page number of the thing you're looking for, but a little description of that thing right there in the index itself. So it makes things way easier. I love that. It's like a little font of information right there at the back that I can just flip to and get what I need to know right away. Now, invariably, some of you out there are going to ask me about playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition solo. I've never done it, but I would say for myself, I probably wouldn't. For one thing, there's just way too much going on with varying combat conditions and spell effects and other round-by-round based considerations for me to ever feel comfortable running a game of Pathfinder solo, at least on the channel. I do try to keep the episodes interesting, and keeping track of a million little status effects for each character every round is not really my idea of a fun watch. But would I do it by myself, away from the cameras? Well, maybe. I mean, it is a very fun game, after all, as long as you embrace what it is and what it is not. But honestly, because the game assumes a 4-player setup, you'd have to basically be running 4 different PCs. You can adjust that, but it's more work. And with these rules, playing 4 different PCs, that's a lot to keep track of. I mean, I find it hard enough in my game with my friends to keep track of all of the abilities and various minor little magical baubles my 2nd level monk has. So, trying to imagine 4 8th level characters or something, that's a lot. And no, before anybody types it in the comments, playing it on Foundry where everything is automated is just not an acceptable solution for me. I'm a guy who plays at a table when I can. For me, Virtual tabletops, while technologically impressive, are just really a necessary evil I gotta use in order to play with my more remote friends. See, my philosophy is I want to learn and understand the rules of a game I'm supposedly playing. I don't want to foist that off onto a computer to do all the work for me. I mean, at that point, I might as well be playing a video game. Anyway, old man yelling at clouds rant is now over. But there is another bigger thing that would make me hesitate to run the game solo, or even for a group for that matter. Those of you who watch this channel know that I'm a big lover of randomized, kind of hex-crawly, West Marches style of games. I don't see how Pathfinder is really the game for that. Because it's so dedicated to game balance, the GM has to basically use a specific formula to design encounters that won't accidentally kill the party. If a party comes across a monster, I don't know, like 6 levels above them or something, which can easily happen in a randomized wilderness crawl, that party will be, in most cases, utterly unable to even hit that thing. I mean, their only hope will be to like get initiative on the thing and get the hell out of there before it has a chance to attack. Now, that is not a bad thing in itself. I mean, I like the idea that the night is dark and full of terrors that sometimes you have to run from. But it does mean that as a GM or someone running the game, for myself if I'm playing solo, I have to compromise the randomness of my discoveries by trying to fit them inside the balance limitations that the game demands. And that, to me, is a limitation on my creativity that I'm not particularly interested in. I mean, I don't want to have to consult a formula every time there's a combat encounter. But again, that's just a personal preference. But despite my frustrations with the weight of these rules, I actually do look forward to diving deeper into them on my future dungeon delves with my friends. I mean, I must be a glutton for punishment or something, because every Pathfinder session I play leaves me both gritting my teeth at the restrictive rules and yet at the same time excited to come back for more. So go figure. I'm having a lot of fun playing it as much as I complain about it. And because of that fun factor, I am very hopeful that Pathfinder 2 will earn a respected place on these shelves alongside the many hundreds of games that I have come to love. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Sages Library. And again, if you do want to help support the channel, please do hit like and subscribe, or become a YouTube channel member or a member of Patreon. The links for all of that are below. We will see you next time on the next Sages Library.